welcome back to my channel Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura and today I'm doing a tag video. This is the Bookish Boxes and Buzzwords tag. It was created by Lizzie Faye Loves Books and I was tagged to do this by Shannon Riddler. This is a tag that I really kind of like. It is basically about how you decide to pick up a book, or what is sort of like the trigger for you to decide to pick up a book. And so I don't think that we talk about that quite as often, but I think that there's so many external factors to reasons why we would read something. So it's really kind of an interesting tag in my opinion. So I'm just going to go through the questions. I'm going to tag a bunch of people down in the box below. I'm not going to do it here because I don't know who's done this. I'll tag a bunch of people. But if you want to do this tag and you didn't get tagged by me or someone else, feel free to do it. Count yourself tagged anyway. It is a fun tag to do. Question number 1 is your go-to genre or favorite type of book. I think it's pretty obvious, especially from my name, where I'm sitting, everything around me that you can see at the moment, and that is manga. Obviously, this is my favorite thing to read. And you know, you can catch me reading it just about any day of the week. So I love manga. I collect manga. I talk about manga here on this channel, and talk about manga all the time to people who don't want to hear me talk about manga. So yeah, manga is sort of like the main thing. But secondary to that, I like to read pretty much any sort of graphic novels, comic books, graphica. I love to read nonfiction books. I don't read as much of them as I would like, and I also love to read classic fiction, and that's sort of where I would go generally if I was going to choose something to read. I probably would choose manga first above anything just because it's a lot quicker and I have a lot of it, but those are sort of my favorite things to read. Number 2 is retellings you're drawn to. Normally I wouldn't say this is true for me. I'm not necessarily drawn to retellings. I'm certainly not drawn to like fairy tale retellings. I think that's probably the most common thing, particularly on BookTube. I am drawn to seeing things that are sort of inspired by Jane Austen works, because I am a big fan of Jane Austen. So I have this novel here, Longbourn by Joe Baker. I haven't read this one yet, so I can't tell you about it, but I've heard good things. But, you know, for, I would say, most of the Jane Austen read-alikes or inspired by Jane Austen books that I've read, I would say 99.9% of them were just garbage, and I shouldn't have read them, but I am kind of attracted to them because I have this thought that maybe it'll be like reading Jane Austen. I don't know why I would ever think that. And then for me, I think more because I read so much manga, and manga is sometimes inspired particularly by Western fiction. I've read a little bit of Eastern fiction as well, thanks to reading manga, but I'm not reading I'm not picking the titles because it was based off of something, but I am reading the original after I've read, you know, the manga. So for example, I read Cypher, and then shortly after I read East of Eden by John Steinbeck, because Cypher is a story that is based off of John Steinbeck's novel. I wouldn't have normally read this novel. There's things in it that are not attractive to me, and I didn't particularly care for it, but I really wanted to find out more about the manga and kind of understand the manga more. So I kind of go in the reverse direction. I'm interested in the original text after reading an interpretation. The same is true for reading Clamp's Rig Veda. After that, I went and I read some of the Rig Veda. So I like kind of going backwards that way. The next question is lifestyles or careers of characters that you like. This isn't something that normally draws me into, like, encourage me to pick up a book, but it is something that I like sort of later on as I read a book. They tend to be titles where the job or the career actually does not interfere with the story. So people who don't have a career, people who are maybe like college students who are in school, or people who are just aren't employed for various reasons, either because they have a lot of money or because they have no money. People who have a lot of leisure time, free time, or you just don't know what their career is. It never is really expressly stated. I like it when the career is actually kind of generally undisclosed. And I also like career based on sort of maybe more time frame. So, you know, like at least in manga, I like reading stories that have like ninja and samurai because it is something that's so different from anything in my culture experience. And so, but it also is sort of based on more of a time frame, and I like the time, historical time that those people are kind of more likely to exist in stories. So there's kind of that as well, but generally I like it when there aren't like actual careers going on in stories. I think that an example of that would probably be this one, Popular Hits, the Showa era. It's about a bunch of aunties or kind of like retired older ladies who probably have never had to work. And then a bunch of sort of like 20 to 30-year-old, they're called like hikikomori, so they don't generally work and they kind of rely on their family to support them. So it is sort of like about these people that generally don't have a career. And that's not what the story is about at all, so it doesn't interfere. Places or settings that you're drawn to, I think kind of obvious, I like things that are set in Japan. I like things that are set in Canada. I don't mind things that are set pretty much anywhere else, but if it says that it is set somewhere that is familiar to me or in Japan, then I am more likely to pick it up. I do like kind of, probably am more interested in reading fiction that's set in the East than I am set in the West, but you know, I don't pick up a whole lot of fiction, so generally I think I kind of go for the two countries. Number 5 are relationships you enjoy reading about. I tend to like characters where, at least in manga, I like characters where there is an age gap difference. It doesn't have to always be romance, but I am very particularly interested in finding the right age gap romance. I love age gap romance if it's done right, and so if someone says, hey, here's an age gap romance and it's manga, I would probably immediately put it to my list of, you know, books to consider because it is something that I'm looking for. But I also really like, you know, mentor-mentee stories where there is an older mentor who is helping out their you know, young apprentice or whatever kind of discover something or gain a skill. I like those kinds of stories. I also like, you know, kind of parent-child stories where there is, you know, an older parent and a younger child and they have this relationship. I like that age dynamic in stories because I think it's a different type of story maybe than having all the characters the same age. As far as prose goes, I don't know that I care one way or the other. I don't think age or relationship types or any of that kind of stuff really plays a part in why I pick up fiction. Number 6 is one I don't think I can answer. It's buzzwords in the title of the book. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I don't think that there is one. Number 7 is things on book covers that draw you in. I generally, as a rule, don't like actual portraits or pictures of people on covers, but when they're done kind of in a really quirky way or have a really kind of simple cover, like Strange Weather in Tokyo, I picked this up, or I, you know, was given it. I requested it because of the cover, and I really love the way that this cover. I love how quirky the photograph is, but I also love just sort of like this stark white background. I also really love and am drawn to, and it's cannot be helped, to things that have kind of bright colors, that have sort of an 80s vibe to them. So this, you know, I picked up entirely because I was like, ooh, that looks bright and shiny. I need to have that. And I also really like covers that are just kind of unusual, or they have sort of quirky illustrations. This one has a comic strip basically drawn on the cover of it. It's Candide by Voltaire. So like covers like this really draw me in. So I like things that are kind of quirky. I like things that are really bright and obnoxious. I like kind of bold patterns. Yeah. So I'm drawn to kind of like bright and shiny things. Number 8 are nonfiction buzzwords or types of nonfiction you're drawn to. Primarily I'm just drawn to topics that I already am interested in. So art, history, comic books, Japan, or a combination. For example, Astro Boy essays, about manga, comics versus art. This is probably the most combination of all the things that I love in nonfiction together in one book. History of Japanese art. So these are the kinds of nonfiction that I will pick up. I generally don't stray too far because I am not reading as much as I would like, and if I'm going to read nonfiction, I want to read a topic that I'm already very heavily invested in. Number 9 is the medical or physical condition of characters. This isn't really something that I care about, I don't think, per se. Certainly not on the medical side. I don't really care one way or the other. If a character has a medical condition, you know, like that just seems like a regular person. So that doesn't really at all affect, I think, whether I pick a book up or not. But I really do like kind of youngish girls, like teens or younger, who have superhuman strength or superhuman abilities. You know, like I was really a huge fan of Pippi Longstocking when I was a child. I thought that, you know, the fact that she was so strong was so awesome. I really like characters like Octopus Girl. You know, she's this young, cute girl, but she has these abnormal abilities. I really like characters like in Gunslinger Girl, where they are, you know, young girls, but they are these intense fighting machines. So I like kind of characters like that. I don't think prose does those kinds of characters quite as well as comics do, just because comics are able to illustrate it, and I think the ideas are a little bit more hokey or silly in prose, so I do tend to prefer those types of characters in comics or manga. Number 10 is sort of what time period are you interested in, what are you drawn to, so it can be like past or future. I generally am not drawn to the future. I don't want to read science fiction generally, so I do kind of avoid it, although I force myself to read it. I tend to prefer reading things that are historical, just kind of, or I like history better. So I would really like to read pretty much anything Japanese history, but I love Meiji Restoration. I love kind of maybe like ancient Japan, like 500 AD, probably is a good era to read in, but there isn't a lot in that era, but I love the art from it, so I want to read anything that takes place then. I love French Revolution, so like if you go into prose, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's a whole lot of manga that I've read that have taken place in French Revolution, but I love French Revolution. So I have read a few books, prose novels, particularly classics that take place during French Revolution. And I love kind of early history of Canada, so like late 1800s, early 1900s in Canada, but I don't like reading early 1900s for any other country. So I think that's kind of a weird difference, but I do like kind of that era, like early explorers, you know, indigenous history, kind of when Canada was more wild and untamed. That is when it is more interesting to read about, I think, the country, particularly on the west side, the west coast. So those are kind of like the main kind of places, periods that I'm drawn to. There's 2 more bonus questions. The first one is any other buzzwords not already mentioned. I think a lot of the buzzwords are kind of taken care of, but for me, when I pick up books, it really is some sort of physical nature of the book. How big is it? You know, is it heavy? Does it have a hardcover? Like, I don't want to read a book that's super heavy and has a hardcover because I can't travel with it. I would prefer something that's a little bit more small and compact, but I won't read a mass market. I prefer books that are have either like really exuberant, obnoxious covers or are incredibly subdued and incredibly simple covers. So I'm not going to buy a book if I know that it's going to get published by some other publisher because I know that at some point it'll be in a cover that I actually like. So I don't have to read things right away. And I certainly don't buy very many books. So things about like kind of the physical nature of a book is actually why I'm going to pick up particularly prose. For manga, I'm going to pick it up based on publisher. So if I find something that's published by, Ponemon, I'm going to pick it up. I don't care what it is. It's going in my collection, or Picture Box, or Fantagraphics, or, some of these indie pubs, Drawn and Quarterly. So some of these guys, I'm going to just pick them up. I'm not prejudiced. I don't care what the cover looks like. I don't care about the print quality. I'm going to buy those. Things that I probably am going to buy if it's a reasonable price. I don't really care what it looks like. So like I have different reasons why I pick up manga, because I want to read all the manga. I don't really have a prejudice to a type of manga. I like certain kinds, and I might at least for things that are coming out new, I might have a way, or I might choose different titles over others for specific reasons. Certainly authors are going to be a big reason. The era that it was originally published is going to be a big reason. I want to read something published in the 70s or 80s over something that was published last year. So like there's some reasons sort of like that way about why I pick up books. So there's some different things. The content itself is actually less important to me. I don't really care about relationships. I don't really care about, physical characteristics of characters. I'm more interested in like the package, the history of the book, what its general meaning is, what I can get out of that book. I don't really care about the story so much. So it's kind of different that way. So the last question is a bonus number 2. What turns you away from a book? And I think that there's a lot of answers that I could give for this. I think more turns me away from particularly prose than it does for manga. I think manga, I'm a little bit more relaxed about what I pick up. I'll pick up just about anything. I certainly will pick up some things ahead of others, but I won't discount any manga at all. It one day will join my collection, or at least that's sort of like the theory to my collecting. Probably won't happen. But there are a lot of things, particularly with prose, where I would avoid it. So things that say inspired by, I don't want to read that thing. Particularly if it's inspired by a movie or something, then you know that it's got very little material to work with, and then it's trying to write this whole story. That just does not work. A lot of like popular fiction like Harry Potter or Hunger Games or things like that, Twilight, some of those big titles that had so much popularity. If a book says that it's inspired by those things, I wouldn't read it with a 10-foot pole. I wouldn't even give it a consideration. I don't know. I don't want that. I don't like books that are set in America that are written about the time period 1900 to about 1960. I don't want to read anything that happens during those periods of time. I particularly dislike Flapper era. I don't want to read that. I will not read that. And if I have a choice, if it isn't by accident, I will avoid that. And then the last one is probably the thing that bugs me the most when I am shopping for manga, and that is the phrase "the manga" in the title. Because almost without a doubt, the thing that says the manga is not manga. And so it is someone trying to trick the kind of uninformed shopper into picking up this thing because it is like manga. You can create things that are like manga, but to call it manga is an untruth, and it really is incredibly irritating. And you're not coming from the same perspective as someone who's writing manga, and so it's never going to be as good as manga. There are very few times when I have actually seen something labeled the manga where it is actually manga and worth picking up. Like I have in my collection the 4 Immigrants manga. Beautiful title. Everyone should read it. It is a wonderful title. Whether or not it's manga is debatable. I would argue it is manga, but it still has value as a manga reader. For the most part, the things that say the manga are just someone who has written something that looks like manga, has taken a manga style and has written something, but it doesn't even come close to some of the worst manga that I've read. And I've read quite a few of these the mangas, so I avoid the manga so much. I will look into every single one that I see because I want to make sure that I haven't overlooked it, because I know that there are a couple of hidden gems like the Four Immigrants manga in that, but I know that the phrase the manga is a pretty good indication that this is something I do not want to read. At any rate, that's my little rant there at the end. So those are my bookish buzzwords and boxes, so you know, check the box. These are the things that I want to see when I read books. I hope that was interesting to you. Let me know down below what some of your bookish boxes and buzzwords are, and I'd be really interested in seeing that. And what is the one thing that really turns you off about a book? Like, what's the one thing that would tell you not to read that book? I'd be interested in that as well. So let me know that down below. I think that's it for me today. Thanks so much to Shannon for tagging me. I will tag a couple of people, so look for your name. And of course, if you want to do this, feel free. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.